The night over Blackridge Farm was quiet, calm, and dark. The stars shone like small cold fires in the black sky. The fields of tall wheat moved gently in the wind, whispering in the silence. Most of the colony's families were asleep, their homes warm and safe. It was the kind of peace that felt endless, the kind that made people believe nothing bad could happen here. But far away, beyond human space, ships were moving in the dark. Alien raiders had found this place. To them, it was not a peaceful farm. It was a target. They had no fear of humans living so far from the core worlds. They believed farmers would be weak, slow, and easy to break. They believed there would be no soldiers, no weapons, no danger. They were wrong. Lena Briggs woke with a start. At first she thought it was just the wind banging the shutters. But then she heard a deep humming sound, low and steady, like a giant insect moving through the air. She pushed the thin blanket aside and walked to the window.
Out past the
fields in the black distance, she saw small lights moving in the sky. They weren't the steady lights of human cargo ships. These lights moved too fast, weaving like hunting animals. My heart began to beat faster. The colony's sky was supposed to be empty at this hour. She whispered to herself, "That's not right." She turned and ran to the old cum panel in the corner of her small room. The screen flickered to life, but no signal came through. She tried to call the colony's watch station. Static answered her. The lines were dead. Lena froze for a moment. The quiet felt heavier now, like the air was holding its breath. She could almost feel eyes watching the farm from the dark sky above. In the middle of the farm, the windmill turned, slowly, its blades creaking. The cattle barn was still. The farm's oldest resident, Elias, sat on the porch of the main house, smoking his pipe. He was a tall, weathered man with a face carved by years under the sun. He didn't look surprised when Lena came running toward him. "You see them?" he asked calmly, as if this had happened before. She nodded. "Ships, at least 3. Not ours." He took a slow breath and tapped ash from his pipe. "Then it's starting," he said quietly. The hum grew louder. The lights in the distance became shapes dark, sharp-edged craft with strange markings along their hulls. They slipped through the night without sound. Lena could hear something else now, a faint crackle, like static electricity moving. Across the fields, the air itself felt different, thick with energy. Her skin prickled. She remembered old stories told by the elders about the night before the war on distant worlds. This felt the same. Across the colony, lights in windows began to turn on. People were waking up, peering outside, whispering questions they didn't have time to answer. The youngest children cried softly in their beds. Dogs barked at the sky, then fell silent as the ships drew nearer. A soft vibration passed through the ground. The wheat swayed, though the wind had stopped. Lena's eyes locked on the far edge of the fields. The ships were landing. Black shapes unfolded from their bellies, long-limbed figures in armor that reflected no light. The raiders moved with precision, spreading out like shadows across the farmland. They carried long rifles that glowed faintly at the barrel. Their helmets hid their faces, but Lena felt their gaze sweep across every building, every path, every living thing. One of the raiders knelt and pressed a device into the soil. A small pulse of blue light rolled across the ground in a perfect circle, and as it passed, every light in the farm went out. The windmill stopped turning. The soft hum of the power lines faded into nothing. The whole farm sank into deep black. Lena's breathing quickened. "We have to warn the others," she whispered. Elias shook his head. "Too late for warnings. They're already here." He stood up slowly, his movements calm, almost lazy, but his eyes were sharp. "Get to the cellar. Find your mother." She didn't move. "What about you?" she asked. Elias gave a small, humorless smile. "I'll greet our visitors." The raiders began moving toward the nearest house. They didn't rush. They believed no one here could stop them. Their boots pressed into the soft earth, leaving deep marks. One passed close to a fence and reached out, breaking a wooden post as if it were a stick. They were strong, too strong for any normal farmer to face.
Oh.
But Elias didn't step back. He stayed where he was, standing on the porch, his shadow long and still. Lena took a step back into the dark, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. From somewhere in the black fields, an animal made a low, rumbling sound, not fear, but something closer to a warning. The raiders didn't notice. They thought it was nothing. They thought everything here was nothing. The hum from the ships faded as the last one landed. The night became silent again, too silent. In that heavy silence, Lena felt the truth sink into her. This was no simple robbery. The raiders were here to take everything: food, animals, machines, maybe even people. And no one outside the farm knew they had come. The colony's nearest defense post was days away. Help would not arrive in time. She looked at Elias, who still hadn't moved from his spot. He stood tall, eyes fixed on the approaching figures. As if he had been waiting for this moment his whole life, the first raider stepped onto the porch. His weapon lowered, but ready. Elise's pipe hung from his fingers. Smoke curled lazily into the air. He looked at the armored figure for a long moment before speaking. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but the words carried a weight that made Lena shiver. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. The raider tilted his head as if confused, but didn't answer. Behind him, more figures gathered. Lena felt her legs tense. Somewhere deep in the farmhouse, a faint metallic click echoed like a lock turning on something heavy and dangerous. The sound seemed to travel through the floor and into her bones. She didn't know what it was, but in that moment, she understood. One thing: Blackridge Farm was not what it seemed. The raiders were about to learn that the hard way. The raiders moved into the yard without a word, their black armor blending with the shadows. The one on the porch stepped closer to Elias, raising his weapon just enough to show he was in control. Elias didn't flinch. He stood there like a man watching the weather change, calm and unshaken. A few of the aliens split off toward the barns, their boots crunching softly on the dirt. They were expecting to find livestock and stores of grain, nothing more. Lena stayed back in the dark. Hidden behind the fence, she could see the faint glow from the barn windows as the raiders pushed the doors open. At first, there was silence. Then, one of them let out a sharp hiss in their strange language, and the others froze. Inside, the animals were not what they had expected. Massive, heavy-bodied beasts with curling tusks lifted their heads from the hay. Their eyes reflected, the light like molten gold. These were not ordinary cattle. They were bred from ancient war stock, creatures once used to carry heavy weapons and pull armored transports through rough terrain. One of the beasts snorted, a deep, chest-shaking sound that made the dust on the floor tremble. The raider nearest to it stepped back instinctively. The animal's tusks were longer than the alien's arm, its shoulders as high as his chest. And there were 6 of them in the barn, all staring, all completely still. In the next moment, one let out a bellow so loud the walls seemed to vibrate. The raiders raised their weapons, but before they could fire, the animals surged forward. Heavy hooves pounded the dirt, snapping boards, and the barn doors swung wide with the force of their charge. Out in the yard, Elias didn't move from his place on the porch. He only tilted his head slightly, listening to the chaos in the barn. The raiders turned toward the sound, confused, but their leader barked an order. Sending half his team toward the stampeding animals, the others moved toward the house. That was when the ground under their boots shifted with a deep metallic groan. Panels rose from the soil like pieces of some buried machine, waking from sleep. Tall, rusted walls unfolded in a perfect circle around the farm, locking into place with loud, echoing thuds. The raiders spun around, weapons up, scanning the edges. But the walls were solid and high, made of old earth alloy steel that could withstand artillery fire. The farm was sealed tight. Lena's eyes widened. She had never seen this before. But she'd heard whispers from the elders' stories about the iron ring that slept beneath the fields. They had said it was just a myth, an old war relic, buried and forgotten. But it was real. Her mind raced. If the iron ring was active, then other things would be waking too. From the porch, Elias finally spoke again, his voice carrying easily in the cold night air. "You came here thinking we "We're weak," he said, almost gently. "You thought we'd run. But this is our home now, and no one takes it from us." His eyes flicked toward Lena just for a moment. "Go," he said quietly. "You know where?" Lena turned and ran, her boots kicking up dust as she headed for the old grain silo. She slipped inside, pulling a heavy wooden panel away from the floor. Underneath was a narrow stairwell leading deep into the earth. The air grew cooler as she descended, the smell of oil and metal replacing the scent of grain. At the bottom, a long room stretched out, lined with crates and racks covered in thick tarps. Her hands shook as she pulled one tarp aside. Beneath it sat a combat drone, squat and armored, its plating marked with faded human military insignia. Its sensor eyes glowed faint red, as if it had been waiting for her touch. She moved to the console beside it, tapping in the activation code her mother had taught her when she was a child, just in case. The drone's systems came online with a low, menacing hum. Old hydraulics hissed, and its weapon mounts rotated. Slowly, checking movement, Lena swallowed hard. She had seen it in training simulations before, but never alive, never ready for battle. Above ground, the raiders regrouped in the yard, clearly unnerved by the sudden walls and the chaos in the barn. They spoke quickly in their harsh, clicking tongue, unaware that something far older and far deadlier was now stirring beneath their feet. In their minds, this was still just a farm. But Blackridge Farm had been built on the bones of a military outpost from a war the galaxy had almost forgotten. Lena placed her hand on the drone's side, the metal warm now under her palm. "Let's show them what they've walked into," she whispered. Somewhere far above, the sound of the barn beasts roaring again mixed with the sharp, mechanical whine of the Iron Ring's defense turrets turning toward their first targets in decades. The night was no longer silent. The hunt had begun. The raiders regrouped near the center of the yard, their leader barking sharp orders, his voice tense now. What was supposed to be a quick strike was turning into a strange and hostile trap. The huge beasts from the barn had been driven back. Inside, but two of the raiders were down, one crushed, the other thrown so hard against a wall that his armor had cracked. Their weapons were ready, their eyes scanning the dark, but the farm was too quiet again, as if it were watching them. Then the air filled with a strange humming low at first, then growing. It came from beneath the ground. The raiders aimed their rifles at the soil, confused, until the first hidden hatch slid open with a hiss. From the darkness below, an old human combat drone rose into the night, its metal plating scarred by time but still thick and solid. The machine's sensor eyes glowed deep red, sweeping across the yard. It was slow but deliberate, like a predator, deciding which prey to strike first. Lena stood inside the silo control room, her hands tight on the joysticks. She could feel the machine's weight in every movement, the way it responded to her touch as if remembering old commands. She pushed the drone forward. It rolled out of the hatch, heavy treads crushing the dirt under its weight. The raiders froze. Some had seen human war machines before, but never here, never on a farm. Elias stepped off the porch, his shadow stretching long in the glow of the drone's lights. His voice carried across the yard, calm and cold. "We've done this before," he said, "many times. You won't leave here with anything but scars." The raider leader shouted something in his own language, and his soldiers opened fire. Energy bolts lit up the night, slamming into the drone's armor. Sparks flew, but the plating held. Lena swung the drone's turret and fired back. The sound was deafening. 2 raiders went down instantly, their armor smoking. The rest scattered, ducking behind whatever cover they could find. In the fields, more movement stirred. It wasn't the wind. Shapes slipped between the rows of wheat human shapes, fast and silent. The younger farmers, people Lena had grown up with, emerged from the dark, wearing old combat harnesses and carrying weapons that had been hidden for decades. They moved with precision, not like simple workers, but like trained soldiers, who knew every inch of the land. The raiders didn't understand. To them, humans from a farm should have been slow, clumsy, and untrained. But Blackridge was not like other colonies. Long ago, it had been a military training ground for Earth shock troops. When the wars ended, the soldiers stayed, raising families here. Over generations, the farm became a home, but the training, the discipline, and the weapons never left. One of the raiders tried to rush the porch, thinking to take Elias hostage. He didn't get far. A sharp whistle split the air, and from the shadows of the barn roof, a large bird dropped like a stone. Its feathers glinted silver in the dim light, and its talons tore straight through the raider's armor. The creature screeched, a sound that made even Lena's skin crawl. These were the razor feather bird's descendants of avian war scouts bred to hunt enemy patrols. Now, they circled the yard, looking for the next target. The fight turned fast. Raiders who had entered the wheat fields didn't come out again. Hidden traps, old pits, collapsing fences, and weighted nets got them one by one. From the house's upper windows, sharp rifle shots cracked the air, dropping raiders before they could aim back. The leader of the raiders snarled, waving his arm toward the ship's location. His meaning was clear: they were retreating. When they reached the edge of the yard, they stopped in shock. Their ship was gone. In its place was a deep ravine, hidden by movable earth panels, and at the bottom lay the vessel, pulled there by massive harnessed beasts that now stood guard over it, their tusks dripping with saliva. The ship's thrusters had been torn out, like the wings of an insect. Elias walked into the center of the yard, looking around at the trapped and scattered enemy. "You still think we're farmers?" he asked, his voice carrying easily in the cold air. None of them answered. Lena guided the drone forward until it loomed beside him, its weapons aimed at the remaining raiders. For the first time, the leader hesitated. His helmet turned toward the iron ring's walls, then toward the drone, then toward the silent, watchful figures of the humans. Something in his stance shifted, he understood. This wasn't a fight they could win. Ilias's gaze hardened. Too late for understanding, he said. "This is our land. Came here with greed in your hearts. Now you leave with fear." But in Lena's mind, one thought burned hotter than the rest. The raiders would try again, or others like them would. Come. Blackridge had survived the night so far, but the war for their farm might only just be beginning. The storm rolled in fast from the western hills, thick clouds swallowing the stars and covering the farm in shifting shadows. Rain began to fall, in heavy drops, turning the dirt into slick mud. The smell of wet earth filled the air, mixing with the faint burn of weapon fire that still lingered. The raiders were scattered, but not yet broken. Their leader was moving them into small groups. Trying to find a weak point in the iron ring, they still thought there had to be a way out. Elias stood at the porch edge, watching them like a man studying wolves circling a campfire. "They'll test the walls," he murmured, mostly to himself. "Let them try." The defense turrets hidden along the iron ring rotated slowly, their sensors sweeping for targets. Every few seconds, one spat a burst of gunfire into the dark, forcing the aliens to dive for cover. Lena was still inside the silo, hands on the drone controls. She guided it along the inner wall, keeping pressure on the enemy. Every time a raider tried to climb or plant an explosive, the drone's turret whirred and drove them back. She could see them clearly on the sensor's shadows, slipping through wheat and mud, moving with desperation. But the humans weren't waiting for the raiders to make their move. From hidden doors in the ground, the younger defenders emerged again, this time carrying heavier weapons, shoulder-mounted launchers, old but deadly. They moved in pairs, their boots making no sound on the wet ground. They were hunting now, and they knew this land better than anyone alive. The first counterstrike came fast. A pair of raiders had taken shelter behind the collapsed north fence, trying to set up a beacon. A flash lit the rain as a launcher roared, the blast tearing the beacon and the raiders apart in one hit. The rest of the aliens shouted in, alarmed, their voices cutting through the storm. They had thought the humans were only defending, but now the fight was being pushed onto them. In the barn, the massive tusked beasts paced restlessly. Elias gave a sharp whistle, and two of the younger farmers swung the gates open. The beasts thundered into the yard, their weight shaking the ground, charging straight toward a cluster of raiders who had taken cover near the grain silos. The aliens scattered, but one was too slow. the beast slammed into him, throwing him into the mud with a sickening crunch. The raider leader, soaked in rain, raised a heavy weapon of his own. It spat bright bolts of plasma into the air, aiming for the drone. One blast hit square on its side, and Lena felt the jolt through the controls. The armor held, but a warning light flashed red on her screen. She gritted her teeth and swung the drone's cannon around. A single shot hit the leader's cover, blowing it apart and sending him stumbling backward. Lightning flashed overhead, lighting the farm in sharp white for an instant. In that moment, Lena saw something in the distance, a tall shape on the iron ring's wall, moving like a shadow. Another turret had come online, one she didn't even know existed. It turned slowly, tracking the raiders with mechanical patience. The rain turned heavier, washing blood and dirt into dark streams across the yard. The raiders were tiring. Their movements were slower, their fire less accurate. Every time one of them tried to regroup, a shot from the house or a trap in the field broke them apart again. Elias walked out into the open, the storm soaking his coat, his boots sinking slightly in the mud. He stopped just a few meters from the raider leader, who stood panting, his weapon lowered now. The man's voice was quiet, but it cut through. "The rain you could have left when you had the chance. Now you stay until we decide you can go." The leader hissed something in his own tongue, but there was no power in it anymore. Behind him, another blast from a turret tore through the night, dropping one of his last standing fighters. The iron ring's lights glowed faintly through the rain, casting the yard in a pale, cold glow. The farm wasn't just holding, it was winning. In every minute the raiders stayed trapped here, the walls around them seemed taller, the land around them more hostile. It wasn't a farm anymore. It was a hunting ground, and they were the prey. The storm had settled into a steady, cold rain that soaked the ground until it was soft and treacherous. Mud clung to every step, slowing movement and making the air thick with the smell of wet earth and metal. The raiders huddled in small groups now, their armor streaked with dirt, their eyes scanning the shadows with growing desperation. What had begun as an easy raid was now a slow death in the dark. The iron ring loomed high around them, slick with rain, unbroken despite their constant attempts to breach it. Every wall panel still stood, every turret still turned with patient precision. The raider leader paced like a trapped predator, muttering in his sharp alien tongue. He kept glancing toward the place where their ship had been, as if he could will it to return. But it remained deep in the ravine, guarded by the massive tusked beasts that prowled its edge, their breath steaming in the cold air. Lena stayed in the silo control room, her fingers tight on the drone's controls. She could see the enemy through thermal sensors' bright shapes against the cold mud, moving slowly now, tired and cautious. She tracked them one by one, firing when they ventured too close to the main house or the barns. The drones, cannons, roared through the rain, each shot splashing dirt and sending the aliens diving for cover. From the upper windows of the farmhouse, human rifle fire cracked out in sharp bursts. Every shot was precise, cutting down raiders before they could even aim. The defenders moved through the house like a single organism, calling targets, shifting positions, never giving the enemy a chance to breathe. Elias walked among them, soaked through but steady, his eyes never leaving the yard. He had fought before long ago. On worlds the raiders had likely never even heard of Vand. He carried himself like a man who knew the end of a battle before it came. "They're breaking," he said quietly to the nearest defender.
They
"Can feel it." In the shadows of the wheat fields, other humans crept silently, their steps hidden by the rain. These were the trappers' farmers, who had grown up learning the land's secret paths. They worked in pairs, setting lines, digging shallow pits, and rigging the old collapsible sheds with explosives. One wrong step and an alien would vanish into the mud or be buried under a wall of splintered wood. The first scream came from the south field. A raider had stepped into a triplin and been pulled into the air by a weighted net. Before he could cut himself free, two razor-feathered birds descended from the dark sky, their wings slicing the rain. Not looking back, not looking back. Leader tried to rally them, shouting over the storm, but his voice no longer carried the same authority. His soldiers kept glancing at the iron ring, at the red glow of the drone's sensors. At the farmhouse where unseen marksmen waited, They were not thinking about fighting anymore. They were thinking about surviving the 8. Lena's screen flashed with a signal from one of the field teams. She switched the drone's view and saw what they had found: a small, glowing device, half buried in the mud. It was the Raiders' operations log, still intact, despite the weather. She opened the first file, and her stomach tightened. The Raiders hadn't come here by chance. This was the first target on a long list of human colonies they planned to raid in the coming months. Blackridge was just the start. She didn't have to think twice. She sent the data to Elias's wrist unit. Moments later, he stood in the rain, reading the translation as it scrolled across his display. His expression darkened. "So it's not just us," he said softly. "They've been feeding on our people for a long time," he looked back at the leader, who was watching him warily. "That ends here." As the rain drummed harder, masking the sound of movement in the fields. Humans emerged again, rifles raised, forming a slow circle around the remaining raiders. No one spoke. The only sounds were the hiss of rain, the distant groan of the ship in the ravine, and the steady hum of the Iron Ring's turrets. The enemy was surrounded, with no path left to run. Some of them began to drop their weapons, their hands raised in surrender. But Elias didn't move forward to take them.
Ice.
He just stood there in the cold, his voice flat. "Surrender won't pay for what you've done," he said. "Not here, not tonight." The leader's eyes narrowed, but even he said nothing. The truth was clear. The night would not end with mercy. It would end with a reckoning. The rain eased just before dawn, leaving the farm shrouded in a pale, misty light. Steam rose from the ground where hot plasma blasts had struck the wet earth hours before. The air was thick with the smell of burned metal, trampled crops, and the faint copper temps of blood. The raiders stood in the yard like cornered animals, their armor streaked with mud, their shoulders bent under the weight of exhaustion. The Iron Ring still loomed around them, tall and unbroken, its turrets tracking their every move. Elias moved slowly across the yard, his boots sinking into the softened ground. He carried no weapon in his hands, but the way the defenders watched him made it clear he didn't need one to be dangerous. "It's over," he said, his voice calm but cold. "Run out of ground to stand on." The raider leader, breathing hard, clenched his fists, but said nothing. Lena brought the combat drone forward, its treads grinding through the mud. Its red sensor eyes locked on the cluster of aliens, the barrel of its cannon lowering just slightly. She stopped. At a few meters away, the hum of its systems the only sound in the still air. "We could let you go," she said, her voice carrying from the silo's speakers, "but you'd come back, or someone like you would." The leader's gaze flicked to the high walls, to the farmhouse windows, to the shadows in the mist where human shapes moved silently. There was no escape. Still, he stepped forward, defiant to the last. "We are hunters," he growled in a harsh accent. "You are prey." Elias almost smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Not on this land." Sharp whistle cut through the air. From the east field, the tusked beasts emerged, their massive bodies moving with surprising speed. They fanned out, cutting off the last open gap between the raiders and the ravine. At the same time, the defenders began to close in, rifles raised. Boots squelching in the wet earth. It was a slow, deliberate tightening of the circle. The leader gave a sudden shout and tried to break through, charging toward a narrow gap in the wheat. He didn't make it 5 steps. A heavy net dropped from above, triggered by a hidden release, wrapping him in thick cables. He struggled, thrashing, but the cables only tightened. 2 of the younger farmers moved in, dragging him back toward the center of the yard. The remaining raiders looked at one another, the fight draining from them. Some dropped to their knees. Others simply stood still, staring at the mud as if it could swallow them whole. The mist began to lift, and the first pale line of sunrise touched the Iron Ring, glinting faintly off the wet steel. Elias gave a short nod. The defenders moved quickly, disarming the aliens and pulling them into a single line. From the ravine, the captured ship was hauled back into the yard by the beasts, its hull dented and scorched. Its thrusters were still gone, but the frame was intact enough to carry a message. By mid-morning, the ship was ready. The raiders, bound, disarmed, and stripped of their armor, were herded aboard. The farm's defenders had repaired just enough of the vessel's systems to get it airborne, but not enough for long travel. It would drift into open space, beacon broadcasting a single signal in dozens of languages. Blackridge Farm is closed to visitors. Elias stood in the yard as the ship lifted into the pale sky, its engines whining weakly. He watched it rise until it became a small dark shape against the clouds. Beside him, Lena wiped the rain from her face, her eyes still locked on the horizon. "Do you think they'll warn the others?" she asked. "Oh, they'll warn them," Elias said, "and the smart ones will listen. The rest." He let the thought trail off, scanning the fields beyond the iron ring. The sun broke through, the clouds lighting the wet wheat in a golden glow. From the hills in the distance, faint smoke rose from other farm signals, one after another answering Blackridge's unspoken call. Lena's breath caught as she realized what it meant. This wasn't the only farm with hidden walls and old war machines. There were others, dozens, maybe hundreds. Leah saw her look and gave a small nod. "We've been quiet for a long time," he said, "but we're still here. And this was just one night." The iron ring's turrets powered down. The beasts returned to their pens, and the defenders began to fade back into the life of the farm. But the message had been sent across the stars. In the minds of every raider who had heard the name Blackridge, fear had taken root. And for the first time in years, the galaxy would think twice before calling humans prey.